Hey, I'm Zwing, and today I'm going to talk about my early thoughts on sealed and draft for Shadows of the Galaxy. So over the weekend, I played in 4 pre-releases and ended up going undefeated in all of them. So I want to first talk about the decks that I played and kind of looking at like key cards and stuff like that. And then I'm going to go into talking about a bunch of individual cards and leaders and things that I think we can take away from the sealed format and apply to draft as well. So starting off, the first pre-release I played a Boba Fett yellow deck. This deck just had a lot of really strong keyworded units, especially like the ambush cards. So like Modded Cohort, Enfys Nest were probably like the standout, really strong cards. I was also able to just play a bunch of the rares in my pool, which is really what you want to be doing in sealed. So choose sides, Rule of Respect, Hotshot Blaster, Inspiring Mentor, and able to just play a bunch of these really strong cards on top of having the Relentless Pursuits to be able to capture things. I think this deck just worked out pretty well, where it just had a lot of really nice statted units all up the curve, decent amount of interaction, and that was all really strong to play here. The next pre-release I played I played a somewhat similar deck, but this time with Bo-Katan. So I had actually a lot of Mandalorian synergies in this deck, so I had all of my 3-drops here, Ketsu, the Fang Fighter, Clan Challenger, so 7 total Mandalorians, which was able to, I was able to use her ping in combination with the 2 Daring Raids I had to stop a lot of early space aggression, which was really important for this deck, as the space units you can see here are not super strong. I was then able to just overwhelm the ground arena with this really good late game here, right? So the Mercenary Companies, the Wrecker, the Riken, Palpatine's Return to get back Wrecker later, throwing a flamethrower onto Bo-Katan, stuff like that. So yeah, this deck just performed really well. Obviously also utilized the rares in my pool quite well here as well. Next we have a Moff Gideon deck, where I also opened a Showcase Kylo Ren, so that's really cool down here. But basically this deck was just kind of similar, where I was trying to survive and then get into my really strong late game here. So the Rancor, the Cargo Juggernaut, the Super Commando squads were actually probably overperformers in this deck, where the 5 mana 4/4 shielded is just a really nice stat line, and it has Sentinel as well when it's upgraded. You could put another upgrade onto it, like the Vambrace Grapple Shot, to keep it Sentinel even if they knock off the shield, so that was really nice. Just having a bunch of other units that work really well with Moff Gideon, so stuff like the Quad Jumpers, the Ruthless Assassins all worked really well with Gideon's ability. And then, yeah, just some decent removal and really nice stat units in the late game. The final deck I played was this Cad Bane deck, which probably was the strongest deck out of all of these, where we just had an insane late game with the Maul, the Jabba's Rancor, the Palpatine's Return, Enfys Nest, and then also just really good damage, ability to push damage with the Surprise Strikes, the Blaster, good removal of Frozen and Carbonite. Kind of funny, 3 Crosshairs here, which Crosshair was decent. I wouldn't say he was like the best card, but in like the late game situations where you're able to just pump a lot of resources into him and buff him up and then take out basically anything on the ground, that was pretty strong once you have like 8-10 resources to use. And then this deck also had a really good space presence as well. So yeah, so those are the decks that I played at pre-release. I think a lot of them utilize like the rares in my pool really well, on top of just having a bunch of like synergies with the leaders and things like that. So getting into the leaders, I think this is something that I wanted to talk about, and probably the biggest takeaway from the pre-release were just like the relative strength of certain leaders. So over all the pre-releases that I played, I think these 4 leaders stood out as just generally the strongest, where all of these leaders were fairly easy to build around. With Cad Bane, there's so many cards in this set that have the Underworld type line, so that's really easy to build. Boba Fett, you're playing the cards with keywords, which is the cards you want to play already, right? Rey's ability looks like it's really hard to build around, but surprisingly, they designed this set to have a lot of units that synergize with this, especially in blue. On top of that, Rey being blue means she always gets access to Rival Swap, which is a super strong card. And then Han Solo, his ability just getting stuff out for free. A lot of times certain units, you don't really care if they have damage on them if you're getting them out for one resource cheaper, so that's really nice there. So the other thing I want to kind of talk about with the leaders is you'll kind of notice that a lot of the leaders here, they have really strong frontside abilities, but they, except for like Han, but Rey, Cad Bane, Boba, they all deploy on 6. And this is like true for a lot of the leaders in this set, where they have really strong abilities that you're going to be trying to build around on their front side. And their deploy turns happen a little bit later in the game. Not to say that they aren't impactful, but if you compare this to how like the set 1 limited games played out, a lot of times in set 1 you would be really focused on setting up for when the opponent did their flip turn and how do you counter their flip turn of your own flip turn. In this game there's kind of like more distinct phases, or in this set there's more distinct phases where you're going to be kind of like jockeying for board position in the earlier mid-game, and then at the end of the mid-game, that's when all the leaders kind of flip, right? They're all coming out on 6, and then it's like, okay, a lot of them actually are pretty hard to kill right away. Like Cad Bane is 8 toughness, so that's a lot. You're going to have to probably sink a couple things into killing Cad Bane, right? So it feels like, yeah, the flip turns are impactful, but they happen later in the game, so they're a little bit easier to deal with as you have a whole extra turn generally to be able to deal with all the leaders' flips. And then once you end up killing off the leaders, they all still have really high utility going into the late game as well, where all these abilities are really relevant. So I think that's something to consider just as you're drafting, to think about trying to build towards these leader synergies. And then consider how you can like get board position into like early mid game, so that way after the end of the mid game, when the leaders deploy, you are able to contest them well and keep playing the game. Kind of going on what I was talking about with like Cad Bane and Boba, I think a really big part of this format is going to be all these ambush cards. Ambush was really strong in the last set, and I think it's even better in this set. So you take a card like Mercenary Company, where I think it was pretty decent in the last set, but in this set it's even better. Particularly because we have like leaders that can actually synergize with all these ambush abilities. So like Boba can, because ambush is a keyword, he can give all of these an extra attack when they're ambushing, and that's really strong. Cad Bane, a lot of these are underworld as well, so you can actually stack the trigger where you resolve the ambush attack first, take out their big unit, and if they have like another unit like 1 health, then Cad Bane's ability would trigger after that. You can stack the triggers that way, and then it would take out the low health unit too, and that's a huge swing. So all of these cards just perform really good in these 2 leaders, which is why I think these are some of the strongest, as well as just being really good cards on their own, right? Like all of these are just amazing statted in this format. Timely intervention, being able to just give anything ambush is amazing. And I think this is going to be a really key thing to kind of understand in the format, where a lot of the kind of early and mid game is going to be kind of revolving around like these ambush cards, and if your opponent can interact with like the creatures that you're putting out. Another topic that I wanted to talk about that I think differs a little bit from how this played out in the last set is kind of the space combat. So in the last set, you would often get into board states where sometimes you would just die to whatever space units they played. So for example, if they just played like 2 A-Wings, you might just kind of die to that, or an A-Wing buffed up by a wing leader or something like that. It would be really hard to deal with unless you had like specific removal. In this set, I felt like I was dying to space aggression a lot less. Like, there are still good space units, right? Mercenary Gunship is probably one of the best uncommons in the set. 2 mana, 3/2 stat line in space is amazing. And this ability really is not that big of a downside at all. But a lot of the units in space, and some of the early units, are kind of statted like this, where they're more 2 power, so you have a little bit more time to not get beat down by these units. On top of that, you actually have a lot more like early sentinels, stuff like the Conquer Dawn Interceptors, the Black Sun Starfighter, as well as more early game removal that's really cheap to be able to take out these, right? So like Daring Raid really cleanly takes on the Mercenary Gunship. Cad Bane can ping off this gunship, right? So like you would get into these situations like, Bo-Katan can start pinging off the space units. You get into these situations where you're able to actually use like the early game removal to deal with the space units and then just fight for ground position, which is why I think the ambush cards were so strong. So that's like a big thing where I feel like it feels a lot different than how the previous set played out, and I think it's something that you want to kind of consider when you're drafting and picking cards for your deck. I also wanted to talk a little bit about Smuggle. So I think there's two kind of classes of Smuggle cards, where there's like the good Smuggle cards and then there's the bad Smuggle cards. A lot of times where these good Smuggle cards are actually just really good on right even when you smuggle them, really. So they're just going to be super strong, and they're really good at just getting you a pretty big advantage or closing out games. Whereas these bad smuggle cards are probably really don't even be wanting playing for like their front side or for the smuggle cost, so you're really just probably better off not really putting them into your deck unless you have a specific reason. Like maybe Hondo is okay playing like, the Starhopper because, he could give an experience counter when it comes out, and that's pretty decent. But you really want to have like some specific synergy that you're doing if you're going to play the underrate smuggle cards. But playing the smuggle cards that are on rate is still really good. So that's kind of something you want to consider. You don't want to just like put in all these like bad smuggle cards, because you're going to draw them and not really want to play them, not really want to smuggle them, and they're kind of just going to be dead cards in your deck. The final thing I want to talk about as we go into draft is kind of thinking about how we draft synergy in this set. So I think compared to the last set, there's a lot more leaders that have very specific synergies that we can really draft around once we start getting into that. So already considering, like Ray, Cad Bane, kind of like I talked about, I think Cad Bane is just going to be really strong because we can just draft all the Underworld cards and just like all the really strong cards in his colors. Ray, I think, is going to be really good in draft just because there's going to be a lot of cards that other people don't want, stuff like Moisture Farmer and stuff like, a lot of the Wookiees a lot of people might not necessarily want, and those are just going to get to you pretty late, so Ray's able to just pick all those up and use them really well. On top of that, there's going to be a lot of leaders that probably didn't come together as much in Sealed, but like stuff like Gar Saxon, Hondo, Bosk, Bo-Katan, that are going to be really strong in draft because you can really specifically draft around them, right? Gar Saxon, you can pick up a lot of upgrades or units that come upgraded, right? Hondo, you can pick up a ton of smuggle stuff. Boss, you can pick up extra bounties. Bo-Katan, you can grab all the Mandalorians you want, right? So I think that's going to be something that you got to, after you draft all your leaders, you want to be looking for just really trying to maximize the synergies. Because a lot of these leaders, you're trying to maximize these like front side ability synergies, which is like the biggest part, and trying to think how you draft a deck around this is going to be really key to succeeding in the draft format. So those are all my initial thoughts after the pre-release weekend. Please be sure to subscribe. I'm going to be doing a lot of content on Shadows of the Galaxy Limited, especially like draft content. So be sure to subscribe for that. I'm going to probably start talking about different decks you can be drafting and different card pick orders and things like that. So yeah, thanks for watching.